John Smyth, Unholy Predator. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Earlier this week, Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, issued this statement. Having sought the gracious permission of His Majesty the King, I have decided to resign as Archbishop of Canterbury. The Makin review has exposed the long-maintained conspiracy of silence about the heinous abuses of John Smyth. When I was informed in 2013 and told that police had been notified, I believed wrongly that an appropriate resolution would follow. It is very clear that I must take personal and institutional responsibility for the long and re-traumatizing period between 2013 and 2024. It is my duty to honor my constitutional and church responsibilities, so exact timings will be decided once a review of necessary obligations has been completed, including those in England and in the Anglican Communion. I hope this decision makes clear how seriously the Church of England understands the need for change and our profound commitment to creating a safer church. As I step down, I do so in sorrow with all victims and survivors of abuse. The last few days have renewed my long-felt and profound sense of shame at the historic safeguarding failures of the Church of England. For nearly 12 years, I have struggled to introduce improvements. It is for others to judge what has been done. In the meantime, I will follow through on my commitment to meet victims. I will delegate all my other current responsibilities for safeguarding until the necessary risk assessment process is complete. I ask everyone to keep my wife Caroline and my children in their prayers. They have been my most important support throughout my ministry, and I am eternally grateful for their sacrifice. Caroline led the Spouses Programme during the Lambeth Conference and has travelled tirelessly in areas of conflict, supporting the most vulnerable, the women, and those who care for them locally. I believe that stepping aside is in the best interests of the Church of England, which I dearly love and which I have been honoured to serve. I pray that this decision points us back towards the love that Jesus Christ has for every one of us. For above all else, my deepest commitment is to the person of Jesus Christ, my Saviour and my God, the bearer of the sins and burdens of the world, and the hope of every person. That was the resignation statement of Justin Welby. He resigned as a consequence of the publication of a report. This report stated that the Church of England covered up the actions of its worst and most brutal serial abuser, who subjected his victims to traumatic physical, sexual, psychological, and spiritual attacks. John Smyth, a powerful and charismatic barrister, sadistically abused private schoolboys who attended evangelical Christian holiday camps in the late 1970s and early 80s. When the abuse was discovered, Smyth was allowed to move abroad with the full knowledge of church officials, where he continued to act with impunity. Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, volunteered at the holiday camps in the 1970s, but denied any knowledge of concerns about Smyth. However, the report says this was unlikely. The report stated Welby may not have known of the extreme seriousness of the abuse, but it is most probable that he would have had at least a level of knowledge that John Smyth was of some concern. It is not possible to establish whether Welby knew of the severity of the abuses in the UK prior to 2013. In 2013, a victim reported abuse by Smyth to the Church of England. Senior figures in the church, including Welby, were made aware of the allegations. In a personal statement, Welby said he had no idea or suspicion of this abuse before 2013. Nevertheless, the review is clear that I personally failed to ensure that after disclosure in 2013, the awful tragedy was energetically investigated. He apologised not only for my own failures and omissions, but for the wickedness, concealment and abuse by the Church more widely, as set out in the report. The review, led by Keith Makin and commissioned in 2019, said, John Smyth was an appalling abuser of children and young men. His abuse was prolific, brutal and horrific. His victims were subjected to traumatic physical, sexual, psychological and spiritual attacks. The impact of that abuse is impossible to overstate and has permanently marked the lives of his victims. Smyth, who died in 2018, was chair of the Ewan Trust, which funded the Christian camps in Dorset. A secret review carried out by the Trust in 1982 described horrific beatings of teenage boys, mostly carried out in Smyth's shed at his Winchester home. One of his victims was Andrew Watson, now the Bishop of Guildford, who said he was subjected to a violent, excruciating and shocking beating, and that a friend of his had tried to kill himself before an alleged beating. The recipients of the 1982 review participated in an active cover-up to prevent that report and its findings, including crimes that had been committed, coming to light, said the Makin report. Winchester College, one of the United Kingdom's leading private schools, whose pupils were among the alleged victims, was informed of the allegations, but neither the college nor the trust reported Smyth to the police. Instead, the head teacher asked Smyth never again to enter the college or contact its pupils. Smyth moved to Zimbabwe, where in 1992 he faced charges of killing a 16-year-old boy who was found dead in a swimming pool at a holiday camp in 1992. The case was dismissed, and he later moved to Cape Town. From July 2013, the Church of England knew at the highest level about the abuse that took place in the late 1970s and early 1980s. John Smyth should have been properly and effectively reported to the police in the United Kingdom and to relevant authorities in South Africa, the report said. It identified several thematic concerns, including abuse of positions of trust and power, excessive deference to senior clergy, failures of leadership, and a cover-up over an extended period. Makin stated, "Many of the victims who took the brave decision to speak to us about what they experienced have carried this abuse silently for more than 40 years. Despite the efforts of some individuals to bring the abuse to the attention of authorities, the responses by the Church of England and others were wholly ineffective and amounted to a cover-up. This has been a long process, but a necessary one to uncover the extent of John Smyth's despicable behaviour and how the Church reacted to it." In a statement, Joanne Grenfell, the Church of England's lead safeguarding bishop, and Alexander Kunieni, its national director of safeguarding, said, "We are deeply sorry for the horrific abuse inflicted by the late John Smyth and its lifelong effects, already spanning more than 40 years. The review concludes that Smyth is arguably the most prolific serial abuser to be associated with the Church of England. We know that no words can undo the damage done to people's lives both by him and by the failure of individuals in the Church and other institutions to respond well." We highlight the comment in the review from a deceased cleric, David Fletcher, who was aware in the 1980s, along with others, of the extent of the abuse. "I thought it would do the work of God immense damage if this were public. We are appalled that any clergy person could believe that covering up abuse was justified in the name of the gospel. There is never a place for covering up abuse." John Smyth died. He escaped any form of justice. I have spoken before about the ability of certain individuals to use religion and their position within organized religion to undertake abuse. The utilization of the power of religion to assert control over individuals, to extract fuel from them, to engage potentially in activities which provide pleasure, be it sadistic or sexual. Those would be regarded as residual benefits. The absence of emotional empathy in somebody who is meant to be there to express tolerance and salvation to individuals through the religion that they follow, and instead utilize it for their own purposes. In some instances, it might be utilized to seek stimulation from the reaction of those who are the victims of the individual utilizing religion in this way. Religion can be used to accumulate victims, accumulate followers, accumulate an image. Accordingly, it is an environment that attracts both narcissists and psychopaths. The Catholic Church has dealt with repeated scandals around the world in relation to the abuse of children by clergy. Here, it is the Church of England that finds itself with a serial abuser that was operating in its midst. I am going to identify aspects of the Makin report for the purposes of conveying the behaviour of John Smyth to ascertain what was he. Clearly an abuser, evidently a predator, but what else do we know about this individual that caused him to behave in the way that he did? It is a long and detailed report, running to over 240 pages. Much of it is directed, of course, to the state of knowledge that the Church had with regard to Smyth's activities and behaviours. That is not so much the concern of my analysis, but rather his behaviour during that period towards his victims and also towards those that might have sought to uncover what he was doing. I'm going to go through this material to help you understand what John Smyth was, so that you have further detail of the extent of his behaviour, what drove his behaviour, and also to understand how it was that such an individual operated under the auspices of the Church of England over a sustained period of time, to the extent that the disclosure of his abuse has led to not only this report and the expressions of horror and disgust at his behaviour, but ultimately the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Join me in part 2 as I commence the analysis.